Good afternoon. As Israeli attacks on Gaza continue to intensify, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has revived calls for Palestinians to leave the territory, a proposal hinting at forced displacement under another name. International outrage is mounting as well as 25 countries demand an immediate flood of aid to end Gaza's unimaginable humanitarian suffering. The United Nations warns of record starvation, with over 200 deaths already from malnutrition since the war began. Meanwhile, in Cairo, Hamas representatives are holding talks with Egyptian mediators to revive stalled ceasefire negotiations, as Netanyahu insists on a full release of detainees to end the war. Will growing global condemnation force the occupation army to halt its offensive? Can the deadlock in ceasefire talks be solved? How far will Israel push its campaign of displacement? Welcome to In Depth. Now, The Guardian reports that Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, warned that the growing wave of international recognition of a Palestinian state must not distract from ending the genocide in Gaza. Speaking after Australia, the UK, Canada and France pledged to recognize Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September, Albanese stressed that political symbolism cannot replace urgent action to halt mass deaths and starvation. She called for an arms embargo on Israel, suspension of trade agreements, accountability for war crimes, and a full Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories by the UN's 17th of September deadline. Albanese condemned decades of inaction that allowed settlement expansion to erode the possibility of a Palestinian state. She also criticized US sanctions against her, accusing Washington of betraying its own democratic discourse and insist Palestinians have already won the legitimacy battle.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reignited controversy by suggesting Palestinians in Gaza should be allowed to leave the territory. Speaking to an Israeli broadcaster, Netanyahu framed the proposal as voluntary, comparing it to refugee flows from Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. The comments come as Israel's occupation army prepares for an expanded offensive in Gaza City. The Israeli airstrikes have intensified, even as the United Nations warns that starvation is at the highest levels since the war began. Gaza's health ministry reports over 200 deaths from malnutrition-related causes. Over half of them are children. The foreign ministers of 25 countries, including the United Kingdom, Australia, and France, have called for a flood of aid into Gaza, condemning Israel's blockade and urging unrestricted humanitarian access. In Cairo, a Hamas delegation is meeting Egyptian mediators to discuss a possible ceasefire. Netanyahu says partial detainee releases are behind us, insisting the war will only end with the return of all detainees and Hamas's surrender. Meanwhile, economic and political pressure on Israel is growing. Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund is reviewing investments in Israeli companies, and the Council of Europe has urged member states to halt arms sales that could enable human rights violations.
Now, to tell us more about these recent developments, we'll go to two expert guests on this subject. From Cairo, Dr. Mohammed Osman, who's an international relations specialist, and from Ramallah by Ramzi Oda, who is a political analyst. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here with us. I'll start with you, Dr. Osman. So Netanyahu's up to his old tricks again. I think we're going round in circles, aren't we, with this? He's hinted to the Israeli channels that Palestinians should be allowed to leave the territory, echoing past thoughts as well and proposals by Trump for displacement. And that's been mentioned by other Israeli officials. What's he up to?
Thank you for having me, Mark. It seems that once again, Netanyahu is pushing forward the displacement agenda, which has always been the end game of this war. Basically, now he is putting it under a humanitarian cover, telling the Israeli media and the Palestinians themselves, and even the international community, that the Palestinians should be allowed to leave if they elect to do so, citing examples like Ukraine and other conflicts. However, in many of these other conflicts, the refugees who fled their countries were allowed to return when hostilities toned down. The only difference here is whenever Palestinians are displaced out of historical Palestine, whether the state of Israel now, what is the state of Israel now, or the occupied West Bank or the beleaguered Gaza Strip, they are never allowed to return. Even those Palestinians who went to seek treatment, injured Palestinians, thousands of them, who went to seek treatment outside the Gaza Strip in Egypt and other countries, are not allowed back by the Israelis since the beginning of the war, even though many of them want to go back to their home country. So it seems that the end game of this war is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, is the complete accomplishment of the genocidal project that is being implemented over there. There seems to be a very meticulously prepared plan to depopulate the Gaza Strip as a first step to depopulating the entirety of the Palestinian territories, which is the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well, where there is a very softer version of displacement schemes taking place over there, unfortunately. This is an act of ethnic cleansing, which constitutes one of the main pillars of the crime of genocide that is being perpetrated in Gaza. No matter how much Prime Minister Netanyahu tries to don a humanitarian face on this very sinister scheme, it will nevertheless always be a crime against humanity and a war crime.
Yes, and when Netanyahu tries to don a humanitarian face, he can hardly contain the fact that everyone knows he's lying. He knows he's lying. It's not true. But he's saying it anyway. I think I remember, Dr. Osman, when this was first mentioned by Trump at the beginning of his second term, and then it went quiet a little bit about moving Palestinians into Jordan and Egypt, and you worried that it would come back, and we hadn't heard the last of it, and here we are. Coming to you, Mr. Oda, Netanyahu, as Dr. Osman was saying, compared potential Palestinian displacement to refugee movements in Syria and in Ukraine as well. What is your take on what is happening right now and what Netanyahu is claiming and suggesting?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. I think to a certain extent it is very easy to predict the Netanyahu behavior along with his government, because it's a religious behavior adopted by any Israeli leader. It's not political pragmatics, which is necessary for any leader or any government in any state around the world. Today, this government is stumbling with their politics since October 7th until now. They are bragging about killing children and civilians. Sometimes they deny the entire idea of the genocide, in spite of the worldwide condemnation and the recognition of these crimes as a genocide. They are trying to evade any peace process, whether in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip, and they are providing conditions to even enter the negotiation process, as stated by Netanyahu 2 days ago when he said that the idea of negotiations or a 60-day truce is now off the table. We have 5 conditions set by the Israeli cabinet, and we need these 5 conditions unnegotiable. which is the disarmament of Hamas, a civil authority, and the return of the detainees, and the evacuation or sort of a voluntary evacuation of the Palestinian population from Gaza. And as my colleague Dr. Osman has stated, the displacement scheme is still dominant for Israel and for the US, and the idea of evacuation is still on the table, and any peace settlement will have to include the idea of evacuation or opening the border crossings, which means the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians because they are starving and they have no shelter, they have no water, so it's going to be forced displacement anyway. I want to warn that this crazy statement by Netanyahu for the I-24, the Israeli channel, when he said yesterday that he has a sense of political responsibility to establish the greater Israel. He is the prime minister of the democratic Israel, and he's calling himself now that he's the king of Tel Aviv. Now he's talking about a complete scheme, an aggression against Egypt and Jordan and the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, as if he is the controller of the entire region. This is the logic he's adopting. He's trying to evade any political dilemma inside Israel by continuing the hostilities and creating more enemies such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran. He always has an enemy, and in conclusion, he's always forcing the Israeli people to continue defending, or can we say defending themselves to reach internal settlement. On Sunday, we expect to see massive protests and strikes inside Israel, which might actually lead to early elections, because it's now very clear and evident for the mediators, for the Israeli people, and for the US that Netanyahu is not able to lead the phase next to the war.
Yes, I think one of a good word that you used there, Mr. Ora, was scheme. There are always schemes, these suggestions, or knowing misleading lies or statements of that are appropriate for the media when everyone knows that they don't really mean what they say. Netanyahu, of course, Dr. Osman, he said the partial detainee deal window is behind us and that only a full release of detainees will end the war. Of course, Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir have never had in their mind getting the hostages back. It wasn't really on their radar, was it? They could have had the hostages back on the first ceasefire and gone through with those phases. So what does this mean? Putting this on the table, saying we need to have all the detainees for a ceasefire. Do you think this is going to fly?
I don't think so. Netanyahu is not really interested in retrieving the detainees or the hostages in the Gaza Strip. They are the least of his priorities. So far, only 20 of those detainees are left in the Gaza Strip. Even President Trump himself spoke dismissively the last time he spoke about those hostages, saying, "Oh, there are only 20 left in the Gaza Strip, and we secured the release of the rest, which were like over 200, according to the Israeli estimations." So it doesn't seem that this is a priority anymore. Netanyahu will always try to push forward some formula that will make reaching a deal to end the war before him achieving his war aims, which is, of course, as we said, the displacement of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. He will always try to create a formula that will ensure that this never happens, that the war is never stopped before he achieves this aims. At first, he always spoke about a partial deal, about a temporary deal, about a temporary ceasefire where they can have a detainee exchange, and then he can resume hostilities if Israel sees that that's fit. And this actually happened in the first and second ceasefires in 2023 and 2024. However, now he changed the narrative, saying, no, we need a total deal that will entail the unconditional release of the detainees and the disarmament of Hamas and placing Gaza under some sort of administration that Israel chooses, not even the Palestinian Authority, which he called Fathistan in reference to the Fatah movement, which dominates the Palestinian Authority, which is the sole recognized internationally recognized representative of the Palestinian people, the standard of the state of Palestine. Yet he calls them a terrorist organization. So it doesn't seem to me that Netanyahu is really interested in any of these schemes. He is more interested in trying to delay any possibility for reaching a deal so that he can achieve his war aim, which not only serves his maximalist approach and his project, the Israeli project of the liquidation of the Palestinian cause, but also serves to prolong his tenure in power, his political career, his political survival. And I think that's a dimension also that we should never forget when it comes to Netanyahu. His policies might serve a very sinister Israeli policy that seeks to destroy any chances of Palestinian statehood, and also it's very self-serving in terms of serving his own political survival. Mark.
Indeed, and going back to the detainees, of course, just a few weeks ago, I think it was, Hamas sent a video of one of the detainees to Israel, which Israel released to the media, emaciated in a terrible condition, starving. And then Israel were complaining that, look at how Hamas treating our detainees. Look at them, they're emaciated, they're starving. It turns out when you try and starve to death 2.1 million Gazans with detainees in the Gaza Strip, you're also starving the detainees as well. Let me ask you about the meeting, Mr. Oda, in Cairo. Hamas leaders are trying to revive the ceasefire talks. What does that tell us about the possibility or the probability of more talks or getting closer to a ceasefire, do you think?
Before then, even before this visit that came with Turkish mediation, and after the illogical campaign launched by Hamas to smear Egypt and Jordan, requesting more aid to enter, and through baseless accusations, and at the end they came to Cairo to revive the negotiations. We as Palestinians, we completely rejected these approaches and tampering with the upper interests of the Palestinian people and drawing more tensions between Egypt, Jordan and Palestine. These are red lines. And even Khalil al-Hayya himself came to Cairo after the Turkish mediation and pressure. It seems that there is a Turkish-Egyptian pressuring card to reach a comprehensive formula, not just a temporary truce or ceasefire. This is good for us Palestinians, but with the Netanyahu conditions, the 5 conditions set by the cabinet, we cannot accept these. It might be very difficult to envision a settlement in light of these conditions, but the U.S. envoy as well. The U.S. envoy Witkoff will have a concept paper from President Trump to end the hostilities or to end the war completely. I think there is an opportunity, but the Israeli stubbornness might actually prevent us from reaching a comprehensive deal. If Israel chooses getting into Gaza, it will be absurd to think of any serious negotiations that might actually lead to the end of the aggressions. Israel so far is still carrying out its aggression against civilians. More than 100 Palestinian civilians died just today. The starvation persists, and on a daily basis, 5 to 6 martyrs fall due to starvation. So the atmosphere on the ground is violent, is cruel, full of genocide, and this weakens the potential to reach a true agreement. Also, the public opinion in Israel is calling for the evacuation of the Arabs from Gaza. All of this negative atmosphere complicates the situation, but we at least have confidence in the six-party committee in the Arab world and in the Egyptian role. We know that there will be no deal without Cairo. Cairo is the guarantor for peace and security in the region, and it is very significant to have U.S. well that goes with the Arab determination. We are hopeful. So far, we hope for these initial negotiations held in Cairo to lead to a Palestinian dialogue first. How for would this negotiation work? And Hamas insisted to be the a prime element representing Palestinians and overlooking all the other Palestinian factions. This is illogical. We are talking about a fragmented political situation, and for the day next to the war, we cannot imagine a ruling without the Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
The Hamas delegation must understand this, and this must be the main umbrella for any negotiations.
Okay, well, let me just bring Dr. Osman in there. What's your take on these negotiations, these discussions in Cairo, Hamas and mediators? What do you think has been said inside those rooms?
I think that Hamas is turning once again to Egypt as the only effective mediator that might actually succeed in trying to create some sort of common grounds on which an agreement can be built. As you have seen as of recently, and I will be very frank with you, Mark, Hamas dealt with Egypt and treated Egypt in a very insolent way as of late. And of course, this was not well received by the Egyptians. When Hamas comes back, hat in hand, basically presenting a covert apology to the Egyptians and asking them to jump back more actively into the fray of mediation in order to help them in the desperate predicament that they have reached. We should never underestimate what Netanyahu is capable of. Netanyahu right now is bracing for an assault, a very bloody and violent assault on the city of Gaza, which will basically seal the existence of Palestinians in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And of course, it is part of a wider plan to reoccupy the entirety of the Strip and push the Palestinians down to the southern area, Raj access, where the Israelis are building the so-called humanitarian city, which is basically a concentration camp designed to entrap the Palestinians and eventually deport them to other countries. So now Hamas knows that Gaza might be is actually facing an existential threat, and that if Israel goes forward and implements this very criminal endeavor they are planning, the results will be irreversible.
It's very strange as well, the way that he sort of talks about it, like promoting it. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do it in the next few days. It's like he's trying to get people excited about, or almost foaming at the mouth with excitement, this bloodshed and killing that they're to do. It's very, very strange.
Yes, it is borderline dark comedy, Mark. Unfortunately, it's rather ironic and sad, really, how low Netanyahu has stooped, unfortunately, because he fears no accountability. He fears no consequences for his actions. So that's why he is promoting his genocidal endeavors very openly. He is boasting about basically annihilating the last remaining city of Gaza. He's willing to do that. Of course, we should know that the Gaza city ground incursions in the city that took place in the city over the course of the war, the city is already ravaged by war and by airstrikes and by artillery strikes. However, there has never been a full-out assault to capture the city like what happened in Rafah or Khan Yunis. If this happened, this means that any traces of any urban life in the Gaza Strip is over. And of course, the remaining smaller urban centers in central Gaza, whether Mawasi or Deir al-Balah, will not be able to absorb such huge numbers of Palestinians. The Israelis seek to deepen the humanitarian crisis, Mike, in order to ensure that no tenets or features of life or means of life remain in the Gaza Strip, so that people might be forced to leave at some point. The Americans and the Israelis, both of them, are lobbying third countries in Africa and in Asia, and I will not name names, to receive Palestinians. Some of them are reportedly cooperative and willing to receive expelled Palestinians from Gaza. We are facing a catastrophe. So right now, Hamas is in Cairo in a last-ditch effort to try to present some sort of proposal that might actually lead to, even if a temporary cessation of hostilities for 60 days. Even if that happens, it means it will delay this imminent catastrophe, and it will open the door for more international pressure to convince Netanyahu or force him even to not undertake this endeavor, and maybe even change the mind of the Americans, who might be, who knows, who might be not so interested in a state of perpetual war in the Middle East. However, the Trump administration is unpredictable. Trump himself is unpredictable.
Okay, I'll just cut you off there because I want to bring Mr. Oda back in. And of course, what it seems, it's all planned, isn't it, gentlemen? Perfectly planned to kettle many of the people of Gaza into Gaza City, and then take out the journalists who are on the ground from Al Jazeera, the Al Jazeera team. So those pictures aren't going to be seen. It's all preparing for more bloodshed and more war crimes. Now, I want to ask you, the Council of Europe, Mr. Oda, urged states to halt arms sales to Israel if they could be used for human rights violations, which is, I mean, what else are they going to be used for? Do you believe embargoes can realistically be enforced, and will it make any difference whatsoever?
There is international momentum to force Israel to reach a settlement to end the hostilities. And we have seen Israeli allies putting embargoes on arms exports, such as Germany. They have cut the F-35 supply, and the F-16, which is the pride of the Israeli industries. There is also the Norwegian sovereign fund withdrawing their investments from all the sovereign investments to Israel, and they are now threatening more embargoes and sanctions. A lot of universities from all around the world have withdrawn their investments from the Israeli universities. So there is an international momentum to cut Israel off, to impose sanctions, only to cease the hostilities. And I think it's a very strong message from these states that if Israel continues the aggression, this will mean promoting the genocide idea against the Palestinian people, which will kill and end the two-state solution. And it's now very apparent to the entire world, especially the European Union, in cooperation with Saudi Arabia. They organized a conference in New York, and this was an excellent move in the framework of the international law, supporting and backing the two-state solution.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to move on before we go to Dr. Osman. Just one more word from Dr. Osman. Foreign ministers from 25 countries have released a statement with the UK, France, Japan, calling Gaza suffering unimaginable, and demanded a flood of aid. I mean, it seems like it's a bit late, really, isn't it? And they keep saying these things. But is this united front going to make any difference from any other united front that's happened?
It's a very nice moral boost. It's bad publicity for the Israelis. Beyond that, it is useless and even beyond useless or below useless, whichever is harder in its meaning, Mark. That's my very short answer to your question.
Okay, well, we're just out of time, but thank you very much, both of you, for your insights today. Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, and Ramzi Oda as well, political analyst from Ramallah. Thank you very much for joining us. And that concludes today's episode of In Depth. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.